I was born in Girard, Illinois, a little town in central Illinois, and I was born October the 4th, 1903. And I had an older brother who was 9 when I came along, and then after I was born, I had a younger brother who was 6 years younger. Well, my older brother was Cecil, and my younger brother was Jake. Well, my dad was Frederick Bach, and he was a grocer. He had been a miner, and when they only had the one child, Dad wanted to get out of the mine so badly that he took a job delivering groceries for the company store, and he only got $30 a month, and he had to keep his family and horse on that $30. And I was very proud of him that he quit the job in the mine so he could get out of there and do something else. And he aspired to be a grocer of his own, which he ended up doing. My mother was one of, I think it was 7 children, and her mother was left a widow when they were all young. So Mom was just very young when Grandma sent her to, they lived in Indiana, a small town, and Grandma was having a hard time of it. And she had a brother in Girard, Illinois, and he was a station agent. And my grandmother sent my mother there to live with him when she was quite young. And she lived with him then until she married in that little town, Girard.
Her name.
Her name was Sophie.
Oh, Sophie.
What was her full name? Sophie what?
What was her
Sophie
last name?
Holland.
Oh,
Her maiden name was Holland. Sophie Holland Bach.
Do you know how your mother and father met?
Oh yes. Girard is a very small town. They went to the same church. And I think that's how my mother and father met.
Great.
When they married, they were both 24 years old. I had some wonderful days as a kid. I just had a wonderful childhood. My father had an old mare that we called Fanny, and she was so gentle I could drive her any place. And I drove a Surrey with a fringe on top, believe it or not, which was a lot of fun. We didn't have any lakes around Girard. That's an arid sort of a state. And if we wanted to have a picnic, we had to go to the woods. So it was a lot of fun for me to load my Surrey up with kids and go to the woods and pick wildflowers and take a picnic lunch. That was a lot of fun to do that. School was quite different than what we have schools today. All of our schooling was in one big schoolhouse. The elementary was downstairs and the high school was upstairs. And before it was time for me to graduate, we had built a high school, and I graduated from that. Sports were a great part of it. We enjoyed the high school sports, and everybody supported them. Well, he went to school where I did. He graduated 3 years before I did. We went to the same school.
And what was his name?
Joseph Herschel. Isn't that terrible?
Joseph Herschel, England?
Mm-hmm. He was an only child, and I fell for him because he was a star football player.
So
when did you get married?
Yeah, when did you get married? What year?
I graduated in 1921.
From high school?
From high school. And there were 21 in our class, 14 girls and 7 boys. And that was in 21. And we got married in 22. And you'd love to hear about my honeymoon, I know.
Yes, absolutely. Keep
I'd like
going.
to tell you about that. We had friends, Lucille and Marshall, that we went every place with. And when we made up our minds to get married, they thought they'd get married too. So Lucille was Catholic. And when the day we were married, we went with them to a little adjoining town, and the priest married them. Then we packed up and went to Springfield and hunted up a Protestant minister, and we were married by that Protestant minister. And my brother lived in Springfield at the time, and he met us, and we all went to St. Nick's Hotel and had a wedding dinner. No wedding, just a dinner. And after we were married, we went home and packed up, and I had a Ford, and we decided to take a trip. And we had more fun. We dressed up in knickers and went on a 2 weeks honeymoon, camping out. How many people would do that these days? But we did. And then Joe had an uncle that was a rice farmer down in Arkansas. And we visited them. And we went to hot springs and went all around and saw a lot of things. And so we went back home then and settled down to housekeeping.
And that was in Dearborn?
No, in
Girard.
Girard,
Oh, you lived
in Girard, Illinois. We lived in Girard and started our family in about 3 years. Fred was born in 1926, and in 1929 Nancy was born. And then when she was a baby, we packed up and came to Michigan because there was just no work in a small town hardly. And Sally was born in Michigan 2 years later. And we settled in Dearborn. And I guess that I've spent the larger part of my married life in Dearborn. Fred was a very docile child, and my mother used to worry about it. She'd say, Chrystal, he's so easygoing, he's going to be run over when he grows up. But he got over that. And Nancy was the middle child, and poor Nancy, she had tantrums, and I didn't hardly know how to handle it, really. But I had neighbors that thought I should punish her, but I was trying to be patient with her. And Sally was the best baby I ever had. She was a thumbsucker. And I thought she was just wonderful because I didn't have any problem with her. They all went to school in Maple Schools in Dearborn and to Fordson High. And that was a wonderful part of our lives. 4 nights, and we only had one night a week together, and that was Saturday. So we'd take the kids and drive over to Sears and Roebuck on Grand River and go sightseeing. That was our entertainment. And I can remember one thing that we always bought at Sears. We bought a pound of orange slices and a pound of peanut brittle, and that was a treat for the kids. That was our entertainment. It was quite different than the entertainment today, let me tell you. For teenagers was my favorite time because we used to pack up and go up to Houghton Lake and spend some time, and that was my best years, I think, enjoying with children. when they were all teenagers and we could do things together. I loved that part. I started piano lessons when I was quite young, and I took from Mrs. Thompson. She lived in a neighboring town, and she moved away, and I had nobody then to study with. So she wrote my mother when school was out and said, "Why don't you let Chrystal come up and spend the summer with me and study?" So that's what I did. And it was a great summer. We practiced all kinds of scales, and I learned a couple of good numbers, and I'd had about enough of music, and I needed something else. And there was a girl in the neighborhood that, about my age, I went to spend a Sunday afternoon with her. She had a bicycle. And Mrs. Thompson said, "Now, Chrystal, stay off that bicycle." Well, I did just the opposite. Of course, I had to ride the bicycle, and I fell off and blacked an eye. So I was caught red-handed and red-faced, let me tell you. But it was a great summer I had. And another summer I remember very vividly was when I was 11 years old. My grandmother always visited her other daughters. My father had two sisters, and Aunt Pauline lived in San Francisco. And Grandma went there every so often. And in 1915, the World's Fair was there. And Aunt Pauline wrote and wanted Grandma to bring me and my cousin Eva, who lived in Girard. She was an only child. Well, my parents thought that was a wonderful opportunity for me to go to the World's Fair. And Dad would have moved heaven and earth to let me go. But Aunt Emma, she couldn't let Eva be gone for a whole month or two because she might need her. So I went to the World's Fair, and it was a wonderful thing. I can remember that I had two cousins, two boys, and they were Rudolph and Howard, and they played tennis. There was a court across the street. Aunt Pauline lived on Laura Street where that famous mission is. And they taught me to play tennis. Well, I was wearing out my shoes. So I wrote to Dad and said, "Dad, send me $3 to buy some tennis shoes because I'm wearing mine out playing tennis." So he obliged me, of course. And in the meantime, Paderewski came to San Francisco. And Paderewski was the world's finest pianist. And of course, I never did see those shoes. I took that $3 and bought a ticket to go hear Paderewski. And that was a real experience. I'll never forget his mannerisms. And I think that inspired me to study a little bit harder in music and put more emphasis on it. So that was a great experience I had too. When I was a teenager, we had a movie in town, and of course they were silent. So the manager hired me to play along with the silent movies. And in those days, you had a script to follow. And if it was a love story, you played something soft and sweet. And if it was the horses or Western, you played William Tell Overture. And I followed that script. And it was a good experience. I got $1 a night and played about 5 nights a week during my high school years. Only child. And he never had very good health. When I married him, he was working for a grocery store, and he was the deliveryman. Well, he bought into the store later on, and his partner was an older fella, and it was about the time of the Depression, there wasn't enough business there for two people. So Joe sold out to his partner, and that's when we moved to Detroit. And he went to work for General Motors. And in those days, they closed down every summer for the new models. So when they closed down, we packed up our kids and went home. Someone was to let him know when they reopened the plant, but they didn't. And by the time we came back, there was no job for him. So he had an uncle we lived in Drayton Plains, and he worked at the Fisher Body had worked in the Fisher Body in Pontiac. So he had an uncle that lived in Detroit. Well, he really lived in Dearborn. And he worked for Kroger in the bakery department. So he told Joe to come and make an application for something with Kroger, which he did. And he worked in the warehouse department, and he was manager of that department. They called it a key man job. And that's where he worked the rest of his life then.
And he died in what year?
He died in 1960. And I was left to fend for myself then. But I was very happy that all the children were happily married. And I had my health. And we had our home. And we had our car. And poor Joe, he had such miserable health. I couldn't wish him back. So I was on my own. And I made up my mind that no matter what happened, I'd make the best of it, and I did. After Dad died, I loved motor trips. And I would gather up my widow friends and take a coffee pot and a toaster, and away we'd go on a trip. And we had a kitty that all the expenses came out of that kitty. So we had we went on trips on a shoestring, let me tell you. It's a far cry from what goes on today when everything is furnished. And it's a great big expense. It didn't cost us very much. We had all kinds of fun.
And you've seen a lot of the country, do you?
I have seen so much of the country. I drove so many places. I drove to California and took my sister-in-law along, and that was years later when I was left a widow. And I had a trip to the east and several trips to Florida. I have seen an awful lot of changes. I saw the first automobiles, and lots of things happened with radios and TVs, which was wonderful. And I guess the greatest thing we did was our trip into space. But that interests a lot of people. That doesn't interest me very much. But it's wonderful what we can do, really. And I think my grandchildren are going to see far more accomplishments than I have seen. I think honesty is one of the truths that I would impress on them. You never lose anything when you're honest with your life. And no matter what happens, have a little bit of faith that you can handle it. Because an attitude has got a lot to do with the way you turn out. I've always believed that.
You were a long-time member of what church, Mother?
And I grew up belonging to the Christian church. My dad was an elder in the church, and they believe very differently than some of the other sects. To begin with, they commune every Sunday, and they believe in baptism by immersion, and they believe in coming into the church through confession of faith. And so, after I was married, I joined the church and belonged to that Christian church in Girard until such time as we moved away. And then I went into the Methodist church here in Dearborn, Mount Olivet Methodist, and it took me a while to get used to the different rituals and so forth and so on. But I feel like we're all going to the same place. And my church has always meant a lot to me.
How do you think you live to be 100?
I think I've lived to be 100 because I'm not a worrier. I don't worry about things, and I try to take things as they come and have a happy attitude. And I think that has had a lot to do with it. And I've always eaten healthy. I never smoked. I never drank. I like highball once in a while, but I think that healthy living has a lot to do with it too. And I think faith and attitude are my mainstays.
How would you like to be remembered?
I'm like my father. He used to say, I don't care what the world thinks of me, but I hope that my children think well of me. And I feel the same way. And grandchildren.